clinic frequent flyer, treating STIs. And she'd been throwing bricks at the penitentiary, transporting illicit substances via Greyhound all over the state of New York. And her latest boy toy wasn't just using her as a mule and a punching bag, but he'd put her bedroom skills on the market. And the price was way too cheap for Wise to ever consider doubling back. This is Bedtime Stories, Grownup Edition, Poetic Justice, Bonus Episode 1, Part 1. I told y'all not to get used to these bonus episodes, Part 1s and 2s, and here we are. When Part 5 ended, Amira's best friend, Hanifa, Wise's ex-girlfriend, had apparently become a problem. LJ told the Queen Mother that Salima was fine and Hanifa was not. 2 weeks had passed since Amira had called her best friend back in New York and told her that if she didn't hear from her, to go over to Marvin's house, get the money she had stashed in his bathroom in the wall behind the toilet, and make her way to Dallas, Texas. Call her brother, and if he was unable to point her to Amira's direction or connect her with her mother, to call the damn police. Well, Hanifa did just that. She didn't wait to not hear from Amira, though. She immediately went over to Marvin's, found the money exactly where Amira said it would be, booked a flight to Dallas for the following day, arrived, checked in at the Hilton DFW airport, and called the number that Amira had called her from. When Star answered, she asked for Amira. And Star said, "I don't know where Amira is. Who is this?" Hanifa said, "This is her best friend, Hanifa. She called me from this phone. This not her number?" Star said, "No, it's not. I'd given her a ride and she asked to use my phone. I haven't seen or spoken to her since then." Hanifa said, "Well, where did you take her?" Star said, "Excuse me? That's something that you need to discuss with her." Hanifa said, "My best friend called me from your phone and told me that if I didn't hear from her, I needed to fly to Texas and look for her. Now, if you don't want the police at your door, I suggest you tell me where you took my best friend." Star chuckled and said, "Hanifa, you said, look, I don't know what your best friend is into, but she owes me some money. So at this point, she's ducking me. And if you can't get a hold of her, I'd say she's probably ducking you too. Calling the police because you can't get a grown woman on the phone is crazy. I'd suggest checking with her man, because I dropped her off at a house a couple of hours outside of Dallas and her man was waiting for her." Hanifa said, "Her man? Her man who?" Star said, "Girl, I don't know. I don't even know her like that. She asked me for a ride and said she would pay me. Then she didn't. And unless you gonna pay me the money that she owe me, don't call me no more, because I don't know nothing about nothing. Goodbye." And then Star hung up. Hanifa didn't know what to believe, but she called Wise. Wise had told Salima all about his relationship with Hanifa. And Salima had said, "Yeah, I'm gonna end up putting hands and feet on her. I could see it now." Wise had told Salima basically that Hanifa was the love of his life until he met her. One of the things that he and Big Wood had bonded over was the fact that when Wise went to prison, Hanifa was pregnant. And seeing the writing on the wall, that her man was not getting out anytime soon, she'd taken a trip to the clinic, but she'd hid it from Wise. She'd made him think that she'd had a miscarriage. He didn't learn the truth until years later. He was in prison and she was moving funny. He tapped into the streets and found out that Hanifa had been a busy woman. She had a little yeah on the streets and was knocked up and caught with her hands in the cookie jar. She'd made a second trip to the clinic. She'd made the mistake of saying to someone that that was the second time. And if she found herself in the family way a third time, she was going to have to keep it. So she cut her little friend back and tried to be all in with Wise. Instead of making an issue of it, he did her a favor. He cut her loose and sent her back to the streets, breaking his own heart, but doing what was best for all parties involved, to keep up appearances and preserve his own dignity. He told her that it wasn't fair for him to expect for her to hold him down while he did 15 years, since he would not be seeking parole. She was a young, intelligent, beautiful woman with her whole life ahead of her. The honorable thing to do was to let her go. He ended the relationship, cut all ties, stopped calling her, and stopped returning her letters. When Amira tried to go to bat for her best friend, Wise took the high road. He didn't tell Amira everything that he knew, but Wise had kept his ears to the streets. And like a typical pass around, Hanifa made the rounds. And Wise heard all about the bodies that she'd added to her count. And like a typical broad, about a year before he got released, she tried to double back, and Wise wasn't going. On a call with his mother, Amira arranged for Hanifa to come over. Hanifa got on the phone and begged to come visit, and Wise shut her down flat. She left in tears, and Amira admonished him, begged him to give her best friend another chance, and when he refused, Amira once again tried to go to bat for her best friend. But this time, Wise let it all hang out. He told her everything that he knew about how Hanifa was getting down. Hanifa wasn't just giving it up to every D-boy with a few dollars in his pocket, or just making trips to the clinic to delete his fetus. She was also a clinic frequent flyer, treating STIs. And she'd been throwing bricks at the penitentiary, transporting illicit substances via Greyhound all over the state of New York. And her latest boy toy wasn't just using her as a mule and a punching bag, but he'd put her bedroom skills on the market. And the price was way too cheap for Wise to ever consider doubling back. When Wise ran down everything that he knew to his sister, Amira had the audacity to try to make excuses for her best friend. At the time, he'd assumed that Amira was going so hard because Hanifa was her best friend, or maybe she just didn't know all that Hanifa had been doing. But after the mess that Amira had pulled with Big Wood, Tough, Marvin, and the brother of the man that he'd offed, winding him up in prison, he'd more recently come to the conclusion that birds of a feather flock together, and Amira knew exactly what her best friend was on. So Salima told him, I'm telling you right now, if the girl shows up, I'ma handle her. We might not be on a yacht, but she ain't got no kids that I need to consider. Referring to True, throwing Big Wood's ex Tasha off the yacht owned by Manny during Salima and Wise's wedding. Wise said, if something happens to Hanifa, I won't be upset at all. But I'd like to think that you learned something from that whole situation with Wood and True. Salima said, learn something like what? Wise said that you don't need to put your freedom on the line. Often a civilian who doesn't even matter. I prefer that my pregnant wife not get into physical altercations at all. But definitely not with a woman who doesn't hold a candle to her in the dark. Salima said, I feel all that, but Wise cut her off saying, and Hanifa is not Tasha. Salima said, what's that supposed to mean? You think she could take me? Wise said, Salima, that's not what I'm saying. Unlike Tasha, Hanifa does have family who would look for her if she went off the side of a boat. While her family's not connected like yours, her family's connected. Then Wise named Hanifa's family, and Salima smirked. She said, you know that I primarily grew up in New York, right? Hanifa don't want none of me, and neither does her family. Wise said, right. We talked about this, though. In the life, you get to make unilateral decisions. And our family, Salima said, we're a team. I said, and you need to. Salima said, let you leave. I said, come on, big gangster. You gotta know that I'm not about to let nobody play with you. But if you fly off the handle and pop off, I'ma feel like you don't trust me to handle my business. And that's gonna be a problem. So when Hanifa called Wise, he'd been sitting visual at the hospital where Big Wood was in critical condition. He stepped out of the waiting room to take the call. And when he realized it was Hanifa, he said, yo, how you get my number and what you calling me for? Hanifa said, well, how you doing? I'm doing well. I'm calling you because Amira gave me your phone number. She told me to call you if I didn't hear back from her. I haven't heard back from her. Where is she, Wise? Wise said, I don't know. Where'd she say she was going? Hanifa said, if I knew that, I wouldn't be calling you. All she said when she called me was that she was in Dallas with you. Wise asked, and what'd she say when you called her back? Then Hanifa told him about calling Star, and Wise said, so she ain't give you her number? Hanifa said no. And Wise gave Hanifa Amira's cell phone number and said, I don't know what kind of games y'all playing, but leave me out of it. Don't call my damn phone no more, Hanifa. And then he hung up on her. Wise had a plan. That plan was to send Hanifa on as many wild goose chases as possible, just until he could figure out where the hell his damn sister was, who took her, and if she was dead or alive. In the process, he had to keep his mother out of the loop and keep Hanifa from calling the cops. He was just praying that by some miracle, Wood would survive and tell him that he was involved in Amira's disappearance. Otherwise, the chances that Amira was alive were slim to none. When he returned to the waiting room, he found out that his prayers had not been answered. When they were at the safe house, right after Q had told them that Amira had called Hanifa, the general in charge of Operation Last Touch walked in, and Q could tell from the look on his face that he had bad news. He said, you all need to make your way to the Level 1 Trauma Center in Dallas. Wood was transported there a little while ago by Metaflight. Killer Q, if you ride with me, I'll bring you up to speed. Everybody exited the safe house, and Q, Selima, Stephanie, and Wise hopped in the SUV with the general. They all wanted to hear what went down. The general explained that he'd used the throwaway phone to call 911. Then he had a lieutenant orchestrate the removal of all of the injured or fallen Baptiste or Lopez soldiers. There weren't many, but there were enough to raise questions. He stayed with Big Wood until he heard the sirens. Then he ducked down the alley and found a safe place to hide until his contact with DPD was able to get him out of the area. It took nearly 2 hours before he could have a lieutenant pick him up in the same SUV that Big Wood had used to take cover in that alley. And when he left, it was still crawling with cops. As everyone listened, Selima called the Queen Mother. She told her that Big Wood had been shot, he was at the hospital, and his condition was unknown. The Queen Mother said, "I'll get the family there." And Selima said, "Can you get a message to True?" The Queen Mother said, "It can be arranged, but I think it's best that we wait until we have more information. We don't need to worry her unnecessarily." When the Queen Mother hung up, she turned and looked at her brother Samuel, who was sitting right across the table from her, and said, "Your stepson's been shot." And Samuel just dropped his head. The last thing he wanted to do was tell his wife that her only son had been shot. He said, "Where is he?" When the Queen Mother told him that Big Wood had been metaflighted to a local hospital, Samuel knew that it had to be bad. In that life, anyone injured in the field was taken to a safe house. A family doctor was called and they were treated at home. Hospitals meant cops. And the only way that the family could take that risk was if Big Wood's life was on the line. Samuel said, "Can you make arrangements to get Zora here from Puerto Rico and Zyla here from New York, and I'll let them know to expect your call." Then he went and broke the news to his wife. A few hours later, everyone was at the hospital. And as Samuel predicted, Miss Charlotte was not doing well. And after several hours, she was a basket case. It wasn't just the fact that Big Wood had been shot. It was the fact that he'd gone into surgery, barely survived it, made it out, flatlined in front of her, and had to be revived and taken back into surgery. When the second surgery was complete, doctors came out and said that he'd coded several times during the surgery, and they had no way to know what state his brain would be in if he did survive his injuries. And the doctor said that Miss Charlotte might have to decide to let Big Wood go. She lost it. She started yelling out things that had the potential to cause indictments and RICO charges. She looked at her husband and said, "This is all your fault. If my son never started working for you all those years ago, this would have never happened." Then she looked at Q and said, "If he never befriended you, he would have never become a murderer." Then she looked at the Queen Mother and said, "If you would have just kept your criminal family in Trinidad, he would have never met your son." And then she looked at Big Dro and said, "If you would have been a better man, a better father, none of this would have even been possible." Child. Not one person begrudged her anger, frustration, emotion, or her pain. The only problem was she had an audience. And Benjamin Woodrow Stevens Jr. had not only been shot 3 times, but he'd been shot in the middle of a shootout in downtown Dallas while wearing an off-market bulletproof vest. There were bodies all around. An unknown person had performed advanced life-saving measures on him and then left him there. And somehow, there were no witnesses or CCTV footage. And when DPD ran his name, they found that he was registered as a federal agent at Lightham. So the hospital, including the waiting room, was full of listening law enforcement ears. And all of the family and friends present had claimed to know nothing about the incident. Thank God, the doctor responsible for keeping them updated was on the Baptiste payroll. And she quickly went into action. She had Miss Charlotte removed from the room, admitted to the hospital, and sedated. She then explained that psychotic breaks were common under the circumstances, and no one should take anything that Charlotte said at face value. In fact, nothing she said would stand up in court. She looked at the various law enforcement agents in the room and said, "And I will testify to that." Then, to ensure that Miss Charlotte wasn't bothered by any of those law enforcement agents, she suggested that someone be with her at all times until her mind was clear. So Zora and Zyla went to be with their mother, and Angela slipped out of the waiting room. And that wasn't the first time that she'd slipped away. 3.5 hours earlier, When Wood had been taken into surgery that second time, Angela had slipped out then too. A minute or so later, Stacks got a text message. He read it, walked over to Stephanie, told her to call Uncle Art. When she did, he took the phone and stepped into the hallway. Then he told Uncle Art, Angela's gonna call you. She's gonna ask you to fly True from Denver to Dallas. You're gonna need to tell her that you already have a plane in Denver and you can have True here in 2 hours. I know that you don't know me and you don't have any reason to trust me, but True's gonna meet you at the airstrip right here in Dallas, and that'll be all the proof that you need that I'm on her side. Uncle Art said, Angela's calling me right now, so I gotta go. I'ma trust you, but if True's not here in 15 minutes, I'm sounding the alarm. And then he hung up the phone. When Angela came back to the room, everything was settled. She walked over to Stacks and said, in 2 hours, I need you to go to an airstrip owned by Q's Uncle Art. I'll give you the address. I need you to pick up your boss. Get her in this hospital and make sure nobody sees her. Stacks said, I'm on it. 2 hours later, Stacks pretended to leave the hospital to go pick up True from the airstrip, but instead, he was scoping the scene to make sure that he could find a way to get True into that hospital without being seen. He also needed to figure out where Stanley had disappeared to. As he exited the hospital via a side door, he not only identified a path of entry for True, but he found Stanley. Stanley was getting the snot beat out of him by Lorenzo. And just as his right-hand man was preparing to put hands on Lorenzo, Stacks ran up, snuck up on Stanley's right-hand man, knocking him out cold with a haymaker. He ushered Zora back in the hospital as Lorenzo continued beating the snot out of Stanley. And then he had Zora call Samuel while he called Idra. The two men would need to come down there and handle Stanley and his right-hand man. When the two kingpins arrived, Stacks headed out just in time to see security and DPD, distracted by the fight between Lorenzo and Stanley, and Bosch pulling up with True. He led them up the stairwell to the ICU and had them wait there. Then he had Renni create a diversion to get Q away from Big Wood's bedside. When he let True and Bosch in, True could barely stand up on her own 2 feet. Seeing Big Wood attached to all those monitors, IVs, and medicine bags nearly took her breath away, but somehow she managed to say all of the things that were on her heart. And just as she finished saying, I love you, you're my air, my gravitational pull to this world, Wood. How am I supposed to breathe without you? How am I supposed to keep my feet on the ground? Big Wood flatlined. The medical team rushed in and rushed True out. Stacks called Q, and when Q returned, Stacks went back to the waiting room. An hour or so later, Q and the doctor came out to update the family. When Angela looked at him, he went over and said, she was in the room when he coded. She's gone now, but she's gonna need some time. I'll get her back to Denver and let her know what's up. The doctors had managed to revive Wood, but he deteriorated further and the prognosis was not good. They were estimating that he had days, if not hours, left to live. And anyone who wanted to see him needed to do so before it was too late. So by the time Hanifa called Wise, a day or so later, Wood had further deteriorated. And when Wise returned to the waiting room after hanging up with Hanifa, Salima told him, my stepmother signed the DNR. The doctors won't be taking any more life-saving measures. She's letting him go. And once again, Angela slipped out of the room to make a phone call. She called True and told her the bad news. Angela said, sis, if you want to get back here to see him one last time, I'll make arrangements. True said no. The last time is going to have to be the last time. I said everything that I needed to say, and nothing was left unsaid. Angela said, okay, well, I'll let you know when he passes, and I'll let you know what the arrangements are. True said, let me know when he passes, but I don't want to know about any arrangements. Angela said, True. True said, I don't want to see him in a casket. I don't want to share my grief with a whole bunch of other people. I don't want to hear stories about the men that I love. I don't want to hear about anybody else's memories, see anybody else's pain, or endure anybody else's pity or judgment. Angela said, nobody's judging you, True. True said, I don't get what other people get out of funerals. I'm done going to funerals to pay my quote-unquote respects. The dead person doesn't even know that you're there. Funerals are for the living, and they're great for people who actually get closure from them. But I don't. I'm not coming, Angela. And anybody who can't understand that just won't. I watched the man that I love flatline. The last time I heard his voice, he told me that he was going to put in work and come for me. Come for what was his. I'm carrying his baby. And now me and this baby got to live in a world without him. That's all the damn closure I need.